Okay, welcome everybody this lovely sunny afternoon. We're just giving you a minute to log on and then I'll introduce the session. Okay, so welcome to the third and final day of Reading Solutions UK's first International Reading Conference. For those who haven't heard of Reading Solutions, they work with schools to improve pupils' reading fluency, stamina and comprehension through the online reading development program Reading Plus. So my name's Christina Gabitas and I'm an author and founder of Children's Literature Festivals charity. I'm also patron of Blackburn with Darwin Libraries for Children and Young People. And I was, I couldn't wait to host this conference. I was asked to host this conference and I thought this is going to be fantastic. There's so many brilliant speakers on here. So we're excited that you have all joined us to meet Randi Gelfman Bender and Kerry Mescallado from Dreambox Learning for their session on using text to build student engagement. So we're going to hand you over in a minute. Feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. This will be monitored, and at the end, that's when I will take the questions and I'll put them to both ladies. So the Reading Solutions team will monitor the chat box and share Randi and Kerry's contact details if you do want to follow up with them at a later stage. So without further ado, so welcome Randi Gelfman Bender and Kerry Mescallado, who are going to take over now and start screen sharing. I can see your screen. That's great. I shall move.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that lovely introduction. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. We are honored to be here. I'm Randi Gelfman Bender. I'm Vice President of Literacy, Curriculum, and Assessment for Dreambox Learning, and I'm joining you today from our satellite office in the state of Vermont in the United States, where it is very stormy today.
And hello, I'm Kerry Mescallado. I'm Manager of Curriculum Design for 312 Literacy at Dreambox Learning. I'm joining you today from the state of New York in the United States. I've worked in literacy and the EdTech space for more than a decade, and I'm excited to be presenting with my colleague Randi today.
For the past 16 years, I've had a job that I really love. I'm a curriculum designer. I create instructional and assessment content for an award-winning reading program. The program I work for is proven effective, and in fact, it's been designated ESSA strong by Johns Hopkins, which here in the United States means it really does work. To be able to earn that designation from Johns Hopkins and to be privileged with more than serving 1 million students, and it's actually more than 1 million now, we had to build something that was not only efficacious, but also engaging. Kerry and I have learned through experience that students will put in their best effort when they are presented with texts that pique their interests or that introduce new and exciting ideas. Today, she and I will share with you some of the most important things we've learned in our content creation journey. We'll explain how text can be used to build student motivation for reading. If you're attending this conference, you already know why reading matters. All the knowledge of the world from the earliest times to just a second ago is locked in text. To make that knowledge available to students, we need to provide them with that magic key to unlock it, and that key is proficient reading. When we help students to become strong, proficient readers, we enable them to unlock that stored knowledge, to learn from it, to put it to use, to reflect on it, to critique it, and maybe even to challenge it. The power of reading allows students to learn about the world around them and about the human experience. The importance of becoming a proficient reader cannot be overstated. A proficient reader understands texts in a deep and meaningful way, and that allows the student to build background knowledge. Background knowledge is formed by the ideas readers absorb from the texts. These are ideas that take root and grow, and these idea seedlings are very important because research tells us the more we know about a topic, the easier it is for us to understand and retain additional and increasingly complex information about that topic. So proficient reading is vitally important. We need to make sure every student can read proficiently. For some students, becoming proficient readers comes easily. From their earliest school days, it's smooth sailing. They efficiently acquire phonological awareness and phonics skills, and they transition seamlessly from learning to read to reading to learn. These are the students who are most likely to pick up a book simply for the pleasure of reading. They're strong, motivated readers. Motivated readers have clear advantages over their less motivated classmates. Students who are inherently motivated to read will have a more extensive vocabulary. They'll be exposed to a wider range of ideas, opinions, and topics that continually expand background knowledge. They acquire and hone critical reading skills that allow them to understand texts in a deep and meaningful way. They understand what they are reading. They like to read, and they view reading as pleasurable rather than a burden. Sociologist Robert K. Mertens' research looked at the widening gap between those who have more and those who have less, and he referred to this as the Matthew effect. The Matthew effect attempts to explain the pattern in which those who begin with advantage are likely to accumulate more advantage over time, while those who begin with disadvantage grow increasingly disadvantaged over time. Students who struggle with reading start to dislike to read. In essence, they become demotivated to read, which makes the gap between avid, strong readers and those who can't or won't read wider and wider with each passing year. Dr. John Guthrie, a leading expert on student motivation, and he's someone that Kerry and I have worked with personally over the years, has done numerous studies on the impact of motivation on reading outcomes. When the motivation for reading is not present, students read less. Their vocabularies do not expand as rapidly or as deeply, and their background knowledge does not grow, making comprehension more difficult. Reading becomes a chore rather than a pleasure. Some students may not want to read. They are not likely to pick up a book on their own, and they may not understand or appreciate the value of reading. Other students are reluctant readers because they have difficulty reading. For some, it might be that they did not learn the foundational skills of reading, and for others, it might be difficult to sustain attention. These reluctant readers are unlikely to ever read a book for pleasure. As a consequence, these reluctant readers cannot decipher unfamiliar words. They read slowly, they may fall behind classmates, and they lose any desire to read.
Another outcome of the Matthew effect is that students who don't like reading read less overall, and that includes reading for fun. The numbers of students who read for enjoyment have dropped from nearly a decade ago and are at their lowest level since the 1980s. As a result, these students do not develop an interest in reading, nor do they have confidence in themselves as readers. Data collected by the Pew Research Center and the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP, which is often called the nation's report card here in the United States, showed that the number of students who read for fun has decreased since 2012 and has dropped significantly since 1984, when this data was first recorded. For example, in this chart, among 13-year-olds, 29% said they rarely or never read for fun. That percentage point has more than tripled since 1984, when it was recorded at just 8%. Additionally, boys tend to read less for enjoyment than girls, and older students tend to read less for enjoyment than younger students. Decreased time spent reading for enjoyment is an issue not only in the United States. In the UK, even though one of the aims of the national curriculum is to, quote, develop a love of literature through widespread reading for enjoyment, a 2019 National Literacy Trust report found that only about half of children said they enjoyed reading, and roughly only 1/4 of under 18 students spent some time each day reading. And I'd like to include a note here. The effects of the pandemic and the resulting lockdowns on students reading for enjoyment appear to be mixed. A 2021 National Literacy Report found that between early 2020 and early 2021, in general, students reading for enjoyment actually increased to 56%, most likely due to students turning to reading when their regularly scheduled activities were not available. And then that number returned back to about 51% when lockdowns were lifted. As this graph shows, when students could choose what they wanted to read, some very popular student choices were fiction and music lyrics in either paper or online formats. Randi will be speaking more to student choice and motivation to read in just a bit. However, not all students had the same reading experiences during lockdowns. The gap in reading enjoyment between students from lower income levels and higher income levels have doubled from 2.1 to 4.6%, with boys being more affected than girls. Higher income students were more likely to have books in the home and access to online reading and streaming formats, whereas lower income students did not have books at home, did not have access to online reading or streaming, and had limited or restricted access to library resources and apps. So what does this gap mean? This gap is indicative of the relationship between limited or no accessible texts, decreased reading, and decreased motivation. And this difference is far from trivial. It reflects the reality that reluctant or disengaged readers are not likely to read unless they are compelled to do so, while engaged and motivated readers are likely to find reasons to open a book on a daily basis. The resulting differences in reading experiences can amount to more than 1 million words over the course of just a single year, contributing to an ever-expanding gap in reading proficiency and academic success. That's why it's so important to make sure students have access to all kinds of texts, especially in classroom and school libraries. Parents and guardians are essential here as well. Reading to or with your children from an early age is one of the best ways to develop a love of reading for pleasure. Getting students their own library cards for the public library gives them agency to choose what they want to read. Many public libraries also have online resources and ebooks, both of which help students who may not have books readily available in their homes. It truly takes a community to mitigate this million-word gap.
Kerry, every time I hear you say that million-word gap, I get depressed. Those statistics are sobering. A million-word gap in just 1 year is extraordinary and a sad example of the Matthew effect. That gap can and must be closed. So if we want struggling, reluctant readers to read more, what can we do to motivate them? Over our many years as curriculum designers, Kerry and I have identified and fine-tuned 6 key text strategies that we use to build motivation in reluctant readers. And we're going to unpack those strategies for you now. So strategy 1 is offer a wide and deep library. To build a storehouse of background knowledge, students need to be exposed to a broad range of reading materials. We need to provide students with the widest range of opportunities to acquire knowledge, and the best way to do that is to give them boatloads of reading options. How much is enough? The International Reading Association suggests that classroom libraries start with at least 7 books per child, adding 2 new books per child per year. And Fountas and Pinnell suggests a 600 to 800 book classroom library. Of course, you want a good mix of fiction and nonfiction. It's important to ensure that every student can find something that interests them. And books can and should be used to teach any subject, so be sure to include a full spectrum of titles to support your classroom learning objectives. A classroom library should always be evolving. Some titles you'll keep forever, but others you may decide to cycle out if they don't seem to be drawing any readers or if they become out of date. And one thing Kerry and I always keep in mind is that informational texts can become dated quickly. So you want to take care to pull those out. If they become dated, they're not accurate anymore. You want to be sure that reading options are available in many formats, including paper-based and digital options. And of course, you want to ensure that you're providing reading options at just right levels of text complexity for every reader, as well as stretch texts for a healthy challenge and some easier texts that are just for fun.
Strategy 2, provide mirrors and windows. So cultivating a wide and deep library means including texts that will resonate with students. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how big the library is, they just are not going to be interested. Students won't be motivated to read if the texts are not engaging. We found that texts that act as mirrors and windows can help provide that engagement and motivation to read, both of which are critical components for proficient reading. Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop originated the recommendation to provide mirrors and windows texts to students. She's been referred to as the mother of multicultural texts. So mirror texts allow students to see themselves, their families, and their communities reflected in text. Mirror text helps students think deeply about and develop insights into their own personal experiences, their own histories, and their own cultures. All students should be able to find themselves in the texts that they read, particularly students who have been underrepresented or marginalized in texts. Students need to have opportunities to read about people who look like them, who share their heritages, beliefs, and values, because it's empowering, it's affirming, and it's motivating to do so. Window texts allow students to see or get a glimpse of experiences, histories, and cultures outside of their own. Ideally, window texts also help to build empathy, appreciation, and understanding of others. And since each student has a unique experience and background, a text that is a mirror for one student can be a window for another. Students need access to texts that help them learn about the world around them, especially students who have limited interaction with people who look different from them, or who have different cultures or backgrounds than they do. Texts that promote diversity, inclusivity, and respect help develop empathy and understanding for the life experiences, cultures, backgrounds, and beliefs of others. And when texts encourage students to open their minds and their hearts, those texts also fuel their interest to read, which fuels engagement, which fuels learning.
Strategy 3, continually build background knowledge. I've mentioned background knowledge a few times because it's so critical for students. Background knowledge paves the way for comprehension by connecting previous learning with new learning. In a recently published article, literacy expert and coach Catherine Stark said this, quote, "When a student already has the background knowledge to support a full understanding of the presented text, their level of comprehension expands. These students are able to easily analyze and interpret, to explain their perspective, to infer and summarize the text simply because they feel more confident in the subject matter. The more information a student has on a topic, the easier it is for the student to read, recall, and understand the text." End quote. To comprehend in a deep and meaningful way requires background knowledge. And as students comprehend new texts, they build background knowledge. The point of reading is knowledge acquisition, and the point of knowledge acquisition is mastery over the world in which you live. Knowledge is the doorway to opportunity. The more you read and understand, the wider and deeper your background knowledge becomes. Kerry and I are privileged to have worked closely with Dr. David Pearson, a world-renowned expert on reading comprehension. He instilled in us the deepest respect for the power of background knowledge. One of my favorite quotes from him is, "Knowledge begets reading comprehension, begets knowledge, begets reading comprehension, begets knowledge. It's a virtuous cycle." Background knowledge does even more than just deepen comprehension. For example, it builds a robust vocabulary, which enables students to quickly decipher the correct meaning of a word that has many definitions. And background knowledge from reading often helps second language learners understand the nuances of idioms or the use of satire in text. Background knowledge helps students to fill in the missing or unstated information in text, making overall comprehension easier.
Strategy 4, connect likes and learning. So as Randi mentioned, the acquisition of knowledge is the goal of reading. So how can you get reluctant readers to like reading? One way is to connect likes and learning. So I want you to take a second. Think about the things that you like to do and the topics that you are interested in. What could you spend hours doing or researching? What have you already spent hours doing and researching, right? When you probably should be doing something else. Your interest fuels your motivation to learn more and get better at whatever your interest is. And it's the same with reading. When students can choose to read about the things that they're already interested in, they're motivated to read more actively and also remember what they read. To once again quote literacy expert Dr. David Pearson, the more you know, the better you understand. The better you understand, the more you know, and on and on. Again, that virtuous cycle again. Research has shown that students who are motivated to read are more engaged and attentive. They put forth more positive effort. They persist more effectively through challenges, and they have a greater overall sense of intention in the tasks that they do. So how can likes and learning connect in reading? Well, when students read about the topics they already like, they're excited to read, and then they learn other information in the process. For example, we know that so many students love to read about sports and sometimes nothing but sports, right? And many times a sports topic will connect to some other curriculum area, such as STEM or history or civics. So for example, a student who reads a text about swimming or surfing can also learn about the science behind the movement and force of a wave. Or a student who reads a piece about baseball or football can learn about the technology that makes helmets safer. And admittedly, this is a reference to American football, so in our case, but perhaps that would apply to cricket as well. Or students can learn about civics or history when they read about athletes who have overcome personal or social challenges to break barriers in their sports. We also know that the more global the content, the wider the appeal across all types of readers, and in turn, the more knowledge gained. This also ties back to the earlier strategies of offering a wide and deep content library and having diverse texts that are both mirrors and windows. None of these things exist in a vacuum, right? The interest to read, the motivation to read, and the knowledge gained by reading are all part of that same virtuous cycle. Knowledge begets knowledge, and that is empowering for students.
Strategy 5, empower learners with choice and control. An important lesson I've learned in my years doing this work is that providing students with choice and control over their reading is one of the greatest ways to boost their motivation to read. The simple act of picking the book or the text they will read, rather than being told what to read, can be the best trigger for self-motivation. Choice and control does not mean that students in a classroom can read absolutely anything they want. Although as a parent, it was fun for me when I used to take my kids to the library and say, go pick anything you want. You can have and read anything you want. So there's a time and place for that. In the classroom, choice and control can and should be a more nuanced experience, one that ensures students are picking from a carefully curated list of titles. For example, we want to make sure students are selecting texts that match their reading abilities. Offer a list of titles that still gives students choice and control, but it ensures that they're going to be matched with appropriate text complexity or topic that you're covering in the classroom. Offering choice is effective for younger and older students. Dr. John Guthrie's research has shown that students who self-select texts are twice as likely to develop intrinsic motivation and strong comprehension as peers who read teacher-selected texts. And a 2013 study by Allington and Gabriel found that students who have choice and control over their texts read more, understand more, and are more likely to continue reading.
Strategy 6, create, hey, did you know moments. This strategy speaks directly to the excitement students have when they read about something that they're interested in and are eager to share it with everybody else they can find, right? We call those, hey, did you know moments, as in, hey, did you know that butterflies taste with their feet? Or, hey, did you know that in ancient times, spider webs were used as bandages? These are the moments when students are excited to share what they've learned or read about in a text, something that makes them take notice, think deeply, and remember. They gain a piece or two of knowledge and they're happy to share it with others. These moments can be realizations for students that learning can take place anytime, and reading is an enjoyable source of information and not just something they have to do in school. We found that one of the most effective ways to encourage these moments is to offer students content that's both enjoyable and informative, content that builds self-pride and empathy, that celebrates diversity, that generates curiosity about the world, and that creates informed world citizens. And most importantly, content that surprises and delights students who are excited to share what they've read and learned with others. Giving students access to a wide range of topics and an assortment of genres of texts in classrooms and schools helps curate those just right libraries for students and allows every student to find the texts that speak to them. Not every student will like every text, but every student will have the opportunity to find the texts that speak to them. This goes back to the earlier strategy of connecting likes with learning. When students can choose what they want to read, they're more excited and invested in their reading. When students find reading selections that interest them, when they can see themselves and see their communities reflected in what they read, when their curiosity is sparked by something new that they didn't know before, they become more intrinsically motivated to read. And that fuels the virtuous cycle of more reading, more improvement, and that leads to greater impact.
Let's take a really quick recap of the 6 strategies to build motivation in reluctant readers. 1, offer a wide and deep library that has multiple options for everyone. Kerry, sorry, I jumped the gun on 2.
No worries, I'm fine. Strategy 2, provide mirrors and windows texts so students see themselves and learn about others.
Strategy 3, continually expand background knowledge to cultivate knowledge acquisition.
Strategy 4, connect likes with learning, which helps students see how their interests can link to curriculum.
Strategy 5, empower learners with choice and control to build both enjoyment and comprehension.
And strategy 6, create those hey, did you know moments to inspire readers to share what they've learned.
We hope that you'll be able to use some or maybe all of our strategies with your own students. And now we're happy to open up the discussion for questions.
Okay, I'm back. And thank you so much. If you could unshare your screen. So thank you so much for that. And that kind of very interesting and insightful there. And also kind of resonating with that a little bit as a child and a struggling reader. I used to, when this was at primary school, I used to hate reading the books we were given to read. I found them so boring. I was a child who was more of a visual learner, and I used to be, unless the teacher grabbed my attention when she was reading her stories, which was often very monotone, I'd be away with the fairies. And that's why with my work, how I write is to how I think I would have learned better. So I do lots of expressive reading, read aloud interactive sessions. But I used to love going to the free reader, to choosing my own book. I used to choose a lot of factual books because that's what I wanted to read. And so, you know, you impressing in your presentation about giving them that choice. If they're given that choice, you're more likely to read something you're interested in. It's like my son has dyslexia and dyscalculia. Now, I had a hard time getting him to read anything. And in the end, I said to him, and I think, I don't know what you think, but I think that's got to be the hardest age group to impress upon, because they're in the teenage years, you're going through lots of changes. And I don't know what you find. Do you find that's the most challenging age group to deal with? Yep.
We do. The teenage and especially struggling teenage readers. We really try to respect the age group by giving them high interest, low readability texts that we've created a library of materials that engage them with topics that interest a teenager, but are written in a way that they can access. The text complexity is appropriate for the learner. That definitely improves motivation to read.
Yeah, and what I found with my son is I was at the end of my tether thinking, what can I do? So I bought newspapers. I said, right, because obviously I think I had a problem when I was younger, but when we were younger, nobody really paid any attention to the fact that you couldn't read very well, or we all had different coping mechanisms, and I coped with those mechanisms, and I'm here, I'm here today. But so what I decided to do, I used to, a full page of words I found quite daunting, so I was more gravitating towards poetry, short bursts of words. So I thought, right, I'm going to get some newspapers. I said to Will, right, look through those newspapers, find a topic that you'd like to read about. It could be on, because he loves music, so we'd always choose music. So it's something he's interested in. So there's an article, a press article about music, musical event or whatever, and he would read that because it's something he was interested in. So that encouraged him to read more. So it does make a difference, and I think having that freedom of the choice is so important, isn't it?
I agree. And I think Kerry mentioned music lyrics was one of the things that kids read during the pandemic, right? That is of interest. That's reading. We may not like all the lyrics that they're reading, but they're reading. And I would also, I'm a fan of graphic novels. I think that when we see a struggling reader who we want them to pick up a book, sometimes a graphic novel might be a good choice for some who need a little more visual support, and that might pique their interest in a topic that we can get them into a book that's not a graphic novel, that's a traditional. And we need to think about reading in different formats. I'm old school. I still like a paper-based book, but you can read books digitally. You can read your newspaper online. So finding the right format is another really motivating way to get that reluctant reader to look at text.
And I think that's the beauty of having the educational technology, is that it opens up, that's the window to open a world to a lot of people. It doesn't matter what medium they're reading it on, as long as they're reading it, which is amazing. We've got some more questions here.
Okay, great.
So an attorney here says, so they're saying, we have nothing. Where do we start gathering a wide and deep offer in the library? My school has roughly 1,500 students, no budget, no outside agencies involved at present. Books on offer are approximately 20-year-old and unattractive. I have just ordered some diverse books, but it costs a lot to fill just one shelf. Where do I start? We barely have one book per child. Oh no, I want to give you.
Yeah, that's I think that comes into the idea of some digital online reading. If the students have one-on-one technology, or even if there's a few readers or iPads in the classroom, there are some online options. Kerry and I love Project Gutenberg, which has older kinds of texts on it, but there are some things for older students, some classics that are on there that you can read with or assign to students, or tell them to go and find a classic fairy tale and have them read that from there. So that's open source. So there are workarounds. Yeah, I mean, it breaks my heart to hear that people struggle to get books, that we don't have our our administrators at schools fighting to get us funds to put books on the shelves in classrooms. That's a whole different webinar that we could do to talk about that. And it's a heartbreak.
Okay, I've got some more questions here. So How do you embed the strategies and digital programs?
Do you want to take that one, Kerry?
Well, for embedding the reading strategies into our programs, well, aside from what Randy just mentioned about offering like the wide and deep variety of texts, we also want to make sure that we have things at proper reading levels. And I think this goes back to, you know, having that high interest and low readability content for older students. You could have you know, a 10-year-old and an 18-year-old reading at the same reading level, and they're definitely not going to want to read the same things, you know. So paying attention, I think, to the students who you have in your classroom. And as far as digital formats go, I don't know if you're referencing like an actual reading program or just digital format, like reading it on your, like reading a book on your phone or something like that. But giving access to, you know, giving students access to text. And actually, if I could bring in public libraries, I'm a huge fan of public libraries, and many of them do have online digital resources that students can tap into. So I would definitely suggest across the board, if you're having trouble accessing texts, or maybe you're not finding what you want on Project Gutenberg or on other open source media formats, head on over to your local library and make sure your students have their own library cards. And more often than not, especially as a result of the pandemic, many libraries do offer online ebooks that you can actually like check out online and download the ebook and read it on your phone. I'm not sure if that's what the question meant by digital formats, but that's what's coming to mind.
I think you answered that question, and I think you're right with the libraries. I love libraries. I'm a big fan of libraries, and a lot of the work that I do is getting the children and families into the libraries. And again, they're not just books in there. They you know, the beautiful Carnegie Library that had a festival in a few weeks ago, which is the first one to open in England, which was in Keighley in West Yorkshire. Absolutely beautiful building, but they've got like loads of computers, so everybody can go online and they can download, they can read from online as well. So libraries now are opening up a window to the world with the technology as well, and that's to be embraced, because, you know, it's not something we've had before. So much more accessible, and, you know, probably affordable, in that I know that some schools will struggle for books, but like you say, all of these are available online too. So, you know, for those that don't have books, we try our best with our festivals, and everyone else does, to try and get books into the hands of children, and Dolly Parton's Imagination Library and whatever else. But, you know, we have got this availability online as well. So it's really important that you just utilize what we can, don't we? Make the best of what we can. We've got another question here. How can I ask the English department to reassess their classroom texts with the students' best interests at heart? Students are repeating books that they have read in primary school, Wonder and Boy in the Striped PJs. So they are switching off, and these are their own words. I tried to approach in a sympathetic way, but it wasn't taken well, as this means that they have to create new plans. How would you deal with this, and what is the research? I think
I'm not exactly sure. Are we asking how to replace books that are being, you know, just read too many times?
Yeah, it sounds to me like they're trying to, you know, obviously, again, it looks like it's down to money, it's down to resource.
Yeah,
that they don't have at the school. And I don't know about you, but I would be saying, you know, what we've been talking about is trying to utilize whatever you can online.
right.
You know,
swapping books with other schools. If you're really just stuck and you feel that the children have read the same titles multiple times, maybe there are other schools in your community or in neighboring communities you can do a book swap, just to get some fresh titles in.
Yeah, we have in our community and around several communities, people have created little free public libraries, and they almost look like an oversized birdhouse on a post.
Yeah, I've seen them,
yeah, with a little door. one of my neighbors on this street has little public libraries, and our community is encouraged to post them in different places like train stations or public parks or places where people are most likely to, grab a book if they need one or leave a book if they're done with one. So, it's a community-wide effort. A lot of times if funds are not readily available, then it does seem to be a community-wide effort to help, get books in the hands of readers. Doubled with what Randy suggested of perhaps schools talking to one another and seeing if they can have book swaps across the way, so the kids at least get something new in their classroom and school libraries.
I think that we've probably answered that one. Again, this one said how to approach a department who doesn't want to change, basically. I think that's probably an internal problem within the setting that you're in.
Right.
And I would say it's just trying to encourage. Let me just see if is there any on the chat here? I've not been onto the chat. Have we got any? Right, okay. So we've put into the chat that if anybody has any more questions, that they can contact you direct. They've got your Twitter handles as well. But thank you so much. It's been very, very insightful and very interesting. And it looks like you're making some real headway there, and with what you've done. Is there anything more that you would like to add?
Keep encouraging children to read. We need good, educated, reading proficient world citizens out there who are able to read and understand when they're reading opinion, to be able to tell fact from fiction. Want to give them and empower them with those reading skills. And it all starts with educators. You are my heroes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, and hope to speak to you again sometime in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye.